I was forced to cook my husband's 20th guest birthday. He threw this void paper at me. Sign and get out. Hi, welcome to Family Revenge. Take a moment to hear the story.
I had personally prepared everything for my husband's birthday party. But when the party started, the screen suddenly showed a series of photos of me intimately embracing another man in bed. My husband slammed the divorce papers down on the table and said, "Is this your gift to me? Sign this and get out." My husband's family smirked as if they were enjoying the scene. I resolutely signed the papers and left, not because I felt humiliated, but because I needed to find the truth and justice for myself. Welcome back to Family Revenge. Right before we dive in, leave a comment and let me know, have you ever trusted someone completely only to discover they had been working against you the whole time? Yes or no? I read every single one. Certain details in this story have been shaped for storytelling and reflection. The heart of it, the message, is what I hope stays with you. The smell of hickory smoke should have been comforting. It was the smell of my father's backyard of summer Saturdays of safety. But standing in that kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, alone with a 20-pound rack of ribs and a designer apron my husband gave me for my birthday, it just smelled like obedience. I tied the apron tighter. Italian leather trim hand-stitched linen $200 of gift that said, "Stay in the kitchen, but look expensive doing it." My name is Lorraine Prescott. I am 50 years old. 7 years ago, I was the regional director of pharmaceutical licensing at Tidewater Biologics, pitching a Fortune 500 campaign in a corner office with a view of Tampa Bay. Now I was perfecting cranberry glaze for a man who hadn't asked how my day was since March. The ribs went in at 5:45. The glaze needed another 20 minutes of reduction. I tasted it from a wooden spoon. Too sweet. I added apple cider vinegar and a pinch of smoked paprika and tasted again. Better. The only decisions I made anymore were culinary ones, and I made them flawlessly. Because if you are going to disappear into a role, you might as well be perfect at it. Do you know what it feels like to be the most qualified person in a room and the least visible? To hold an MBA and a decade of regulatory experience and spend your Tuesday mornings comparing thread counts for tablecloths I did. I knew exactly what it felt like. It felt like hickory smoke at dawn, familiar, warm, and slowly suffocating. Grant's phone buzzed on the quartz countertop. The screen lit up with a name I couldn't read before it went dark. He'd left it there overnight, which was unusual. My husband, Grant Holloway, 47, managing partner of Holloway Commercial Realty, was meticulous about his phone. It slept on his nightstand, screen down, always. Finding it here on the kitchen island felt like finding a shoe in the refrigerator. Wrong in a way I couldn't articulate, but couldn't ignore. I didn't pick it up. I should have. I went back to the glaze. By 11, the house filled with the particular noise of a Holloway family gathering, laughter that performed more than it expressed, compliments that corrected more than they praised. 20 guests for a summer barbecue, and I had cooked for every one of them alone. Colleen Holloway arrived first, as she always did. My mother-in-law, 65, swept through the back door in pearls and an expression of benevolent disapproval she had spent decades perfecting. She surveyed the patio table and frowned. "The napkins are linen, Lorraine. I thought we discussed cotton for outdoor parties." We had not discussed anything. Colleen did not discuss. She announced, and if you failed to comply, she revised history until it appeared you had agreed. "I'll make a note for next time," I said. She touched my arm. "You always do." Bryn Holloway bounded in behind her. 28, Grant's younger sister, newly minted pharmacist, waving a framed diploma like a child with a finger painting. I smiled and said congratulations, and tried not to remember what Grant had mentioned 3 months ago, after too much bourbon, that Bryn had nearly failed her third-year clinical exam. Nearly failed. And now apparently she had graduated first in her class. "Foucault, first in my class," Bryn said, holding the frame toward me as if I might want to inspect the calligraphy. "Can you believe it?" The professor said my case study was the best he'd seen in a decade. I could not believe it. That was precisely the problem. Grant materialized in the kitchen doorway in a pressed linen shirt collar, open smile wide and perfectly calibrated. The smile that closed deals. The smile that made clients feel they were the only person in the room. He had been giving me that smile for 7 years, and somewhere around year 5 I realized it was the same one he gave everyone. "Hey, do you know where your father's papers are?" he asked, opening the refrigerator for a sparkling water. Dad was asking about inheritance procedures, just to know. 3 times. He had asked me that same question 3 times in 30 days, each time phrased slightly differently, each time with the same rehearsed casualness, the same tilt of the head, the same reaching for something in the refrigerator so he wouldn't have to look me in the eye, and I had answered every single time without wondering why. "Same place they've always been," I said. "The filing cabinet in my office." "Right." He cracked the sparkling water. "Just checking." He wandered back toward the patio, and I stood there with a wooden spoon in my hand and the slow, cold sensation of a pattern revealing itself the way you suddenly see a shape in a cloud that was always there. The heat from the double oven pressed against my legs. Outside, ice clinked in glasses. Someone laughed too loudly. Colleen's perfume drifted through the open window, something French and assertive. Vernon Holloway arrived last, which meant he arrived on time. Everyone else was simply early out of deference. 70 years old former director of a 14-clinic health network, and the family's unquestioned patriarch. He carried a glass of Bordeaux the way other men carry authority, loosely, because he never doubted it would stay in his grip. He found me refilling the water pitcher by the dessert table. He raised his glass in my direction. A small tilt of acknowledgement. "A beautiful table," his expression said. "Well done." But his eyes were not admiring. They were appraising. The way a man looks at a property he has already decided to acquire, counting the rooms before he makes the offer. And then his gaze shifted past me to Grant, who stood by the grill with a beer and that same closing deal smile. Something passed between father and son. Brief, practiced, a signal, a confirmation. I set the pitcher down and felt the apron strings pull tight across my back. The hickory smoke drifted over the yard, and for the first time in 7 years I did not feel like a wife. I felt like a mark. I carried the platter to the table with both hands steady, 20 portions of ribs I had been seasoning since before sunrise, and not a single person looked up. They were laughing at something Vernon had said. Bryn was showing her diploma to a cousin. Colleen was rearranging the centerpiece I had spent 40 minutes positioning that morning. Grant stood at the head of the table with a sparkling water in one hand and the other resting on the back of his chair like a man surveying a kingdom. I set the platter down between the coleslaw and the corn salad and stepped back, and the conversation continued as though the food had delivered itself. I served every plate. Ribs, 2 sides, cornbread. 20 guests. I did not sit down until everyone else had started eating, because that was the rhythm I had learned. You serve, you wait, you eat last, you clean first. 7 years of that rhythm, and it had become so natural that I barely noticed it anymore. The way you stop noticing the hum of a refrigerator until someone unplugs it. Have you ever cooked for someone for 7 years and realized in a single moment that they were just waiting for you to finish the last meal? Grant tapped his spoon against his wine glass. The table fell silent. He stood with that wide, practiced smile, the one I had once mistaken for warmth, and cleared his throat. "I know today is about celebration," he said, "but sometimes honesty is the greatest gift you can give someone." He paused. The pause was rehearsed. I know this because Grant never paused unless he had planned to. Every silence he left was architectural, designed to make the next word land harder. "I've discovered something I can't ignore." He reached beneath the table and produced a remote. The 75-inch television mounted on the dining room wall, the one we used for football Sundays, and nothing else flickered to life. And there, in high definition, in front of 20 guests and a platter of ribs I had woken at dawn to prepare, were photographs of me. Me in a hotel lobby. Me at a restaurant I did not recognize. Me beside a man I had never seen in my life. a man with dark hair and a mole beneath his left eye. His arm draped over my shoulders with the easy familiarity of a lover. Text messages scrolled beside the images. Dates, times, endearments I had never written. A narrative of infidelity constructed with the precision of a legal brief. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of people finishing a meal. The terrible silence of 20 humans collectively deciding not to breathe. "Grant," I said. My voice came out flat, controlled. I did not recognize it. I have never met the man in that photograph. And you know that. He tilted his head, that same tilt from the kitchen. I wish that were true, Lorraine. I really do. The man in the photograph had a mole beneath his left eye. I had never known anyone with a mole beneath their left eye. I had never stayed in that hotel. I had never sent those messages. And yet there I was, projected in living color for my husband's family and friends and colleagues, caught in an affair that had been manufactured with the care and budget of an advertising campaign. Bryn set down her fork. A cousin near the end of the table whispered something to his wife. Vernon sipped his Bordeaux and said nothing. He did not look surprised. He did not look at the screen at all. He looked at me. Grant reached into the chair beside him and produced a white legal envelope. He walked it to my end of the table slowly, the way a process server approaches a door. He set it beside my untouched plate. "My lawyer will call you tomorrow morning," he said. His voice was gentle, reasonable, calibrated for an audience. "I think you'll find the terms more than fair." The envelope sat beside my slice of birthday cake. White, crisp, final. My name typed across the front in a font so clean it looked like it had been waiting there for weeks. Mrs. Lorraine Holloway. I did not open it. I looked at the photograph still glowing on the screen. I looked at the text messages scrolling in a slow loop, each one a sentence I had never typed, attributed to a phone number I had never dialed. I looked at the man with the mole, his arm around a version of me that did not exist in a hotel room I had never entered. Then I looked at Colleen. She was cutting her meat. Small, precise strokes. Her jaw set. Her eyes deliberately lowered. Not the face of a mother-in-law who had just discovered a devastating secret about her son's marriage. Not shock, not outrage, not even curiosity. The face of a woman who had known for months. She lifted a piece of rib to her mouth, chewed twice, and said without looking up, "The salt is a little heavy today, Lorraine." 20 people at that table, and not one of them asked me if it was true. Not one of them looked at those photographs and said, "Wait, let her speak." The silence was not confusion. It was consensus. They had all been briefed. Every last one of them had come to my table, eaten my food, smiled at my centerpiece, and waited for the show. I pressed my palms flat against the dark wood. The grain was cool beneath my fingers. The birthday candles on the cake had not been lit. Nobody had planned to light them. There had never been a celebration. There had only been a sentencing. And somewhere between the cooling ribs and the untouched cake and the hum of fabricated evidence playing on a loop behind me, the shock began to harden into something else, something quieter, something with edges. I pushed my chair back. The legs shrieked against the tile, and for the first time in 7 years, every person at that table looked at me. I reached behind my neck and untied the apron. I folded it the way you fold a flag at a funeral, deliberate corner-to-corner final. I placed it on the seat of my chair, smoothed it once with my palm, and stood straight. Nobody spoke. The fabricated photographs still cycled on the television behind me, casting blue light across the silent table. 20 faces waited for what they had been told would come next. The tears, the denial, the begging. Grant had staged this for an audience, and the audience was leaning forward in their seats. I gave them nothing. I looked at Colleen. She had stopped cutting her meat. Her knife hovered over the plate motionless, and for just a moment her composure slipped not into sympathy, but into uncertainty. She had rehearsed for hysteria. She had not rehearsed for this. "Thank you for coming," I said. My voice was level, almost pleasant, the voice I used to use in boardrooms when a client challenged my numbers and I knew I was right. I won't be at the party from now on. I turned toward the front door. My heels clicked on the tile. The sound was enormous in that silence. Don't be dramatic, Lorraine, Grant called from behind me. His voice had shifted. The gentle, reasonable tone from his speech was gone, replaced by something tighter. Sit down. We can discuss this like adults. I did not sit down. I did not turn around. I reached the front door and wrapped my hand around the knob. The metal was cool against my palm, and I held it for 1 second longer than I needed to, not because I was hesitating, but because I wanted to remember the feeling. The last time I touched anything in that house. Grant had rehearsed for a hurricane. The screaming, the shattered glass, the spectacle that would justify everything he had just done. What he got was a woman who simply turned off the weather. I stepped through the door into the Florida heat and pulled it shut behind me. The barbecue smoke still hung in the air outside, clinging to my dress, my hair, my skin. I walked to my car on the street, got in, and drove. I did not know where I was going. I drove south on Coral Way for 6 minutes before I realized I was heading toward the turnpike, so I pulled into a Publix parking lot and stopped. The engine idled. The air conditioning blew against my face. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, which surprised me because inside, I felt absolutely still. The parking lot shimmered with heat. A woman pushed a cart past my window, her toddler asleep in the seat. Normal life 10 feet away, continuing as though mine had not just detonated. I had not eaten since 5:30 that morning. My mouth tasted like metal and old coffee. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and breathed. Then I picked up my phone and called my mother. Alma Prescott answered before the second ring. 70 years old, a retired elementary school librarian who watered her Cedar Key garden at 6 every morning and read mystery novels before bed. She had never once in my life raised her voice. She answered as though she had been sitting beside the phone waiting. "Mom," I said. "He did it. At the table. In front of everyone." Silence. I told her everything. The photographs on the television, the man I had never met, the text messages I had never sent, the white envelope beside my birthday cake, Colleen's knife moving through the meat without pause, Grant's rehearsed speech about honesty being a gift. I talked for 10 minutes straight, and my mother did not interrupt me once. When was the last time my mother had surprised me? She was a woman who alphabetized her spice rack and ironed her pillowcases. She drove 5 miles under the speed limit and kept a flashlight in every room. She was predictable the way gravity is predictable, constant, invisible beneath everything. In 45 years, she had never once done anything I did not expect. I finished talking. The parking lot was quiet. A mockingbird sang from the roof of the Publix. I waited for what I thought would come. Comfort, outrage, maybe tears. "Don't sign anything," Alma said. Her voice was calm. Not soothing calm. Operational calm. The voice of a woman consulting a checklist she had written a long time ago. "What? Don't sign anything they give you. Don't respond to his lawyer. Don't go back to the house alone. Drive to me tonight." "Mom, what are you—" "I've prepared for this." The words landed in the car like a third passenger. I gripped the phone harder against my ear. The air conditioning hummed. The mockingbird outside had gone quiet, as though it too was waiting for an explanation. "Prepared for what I said." The line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen. Alma Prescott. Call duration 47 seconds of her speaking out of 10 minutes and 47 seconds total. 5 words that made no sense and changed everything. My mother, the woman who had never raised her voice in 70 years, who organized her bookshelves by Dewey Decimal out of habit, who sent me birthday cards that arrived 3 days early because she did not trust the mail. That woman had just told me she was ready for war, and she had hung up before I could ask what weapons she was carrying. I put the car in drive. Cedar Key was 3.5 hours north. I pulled out of the parking lot and turned onto the turnpike, still wearing the dress I had cooked in, still smelling like hickory smoke and someone else's plan. Behind me, 20 people were finishing the meal I had made them. Ahead of me, my mother was waiting with something I could not yet imagine. Alma's cottage in Cedar Key smelled like chamomile and salt air, and she was already at the kitchen table when I arrived. 3.5 hours of driving through fading Florida light, and my mother had spent every one of those minutes preparing tea, poured the single pendant lamp, lit a second chair pulled out and angled toward hers. She did not hug me. She did not ask if I was okay. She looked at my face, read whatever was written there, and nodded once. "Sit down," she said. "Drink this first." The tea was chamomile. Too bitter she had forgotten the honey, or maybe she hadn't. Maybe she knew that sweetness was not what this conversation needed. I drank it anyway, because my hands needed something to hold. The ceramic was warm against my palms. The table wobbled the way it always had, one leg shorter than the others. The same table where I had shelled peas as a child while my father worked in his lab behind the house. My father. That was where this started. "Do you remember your father's patent?" Alma said. I set the cup down. "The active compound formula, the one he registered before he died." "Yes." "What about it?" Alma folded her hands on the table. Her fingers were thin, the knuckles swollen with age, but her grip was steady. She had the posture of a woman about to deliver a verdict. "A company called Meridian Pharma has been trying to license it," she said. "The compound your father developed. They've been in negotiations through intermediaries for almost 2 years. The current offer is $12 million. The pendant lamp swayed in a draft from the window. Outside, the Gulf wind pushed against the cottage glass. I heard it rattle in the frame. "12 million, I repeated. 12 million. And your husband knew about it 6 months before you did. My father spent 11 years in a lab the size of a garden shed to create that formula. He mapped molecular structures on graph paper by hand, with a mechanical pencil he sharpened with a pocket knife. He died with dirt under his fingernails and a patent he never saw monetized, leaving behind a compound that could reduce inflammation markers by 40% in clinical mice. He thought it might change lives someday. He never imagined it would be worth $12 million, and he certainly never imagined his son-in-law would try to steal it at a barbecue. The questions about my father's papers. 3 times in 30 days, each time more casual than the last. The filing cabinet in my office. Grant hadn't been asking out of curiosity or inheritance planning. He had been mapping the location of a $12 million document the way a burglar cases a house, checking the windows, testing the locks, noting which lights go off at what time. "The ambush," I said slowly. "The photographs. The affair that never happened. That wasn't about the marriage." "No," Alma said. "It was about the patent. It was always about the patent." I leaned back in my chair. The wood creaked. Through the kitchen window I could see the Cedar Key Marina boats bobbing in the last orange light. A pelican sat on a piling, motionless, watching the water the way my mother was watching me, patient alert, waiting to see which way I would move. How do you sit across from the woman who raised you and realize she has been carrying a grenade in her pocket for months, waiting for the right moment to pull the pin? "Mom," I said, "how long have you known this?" She looked down at her hands. The same hands that had packed my school lunches and stamped library books and planted tomatoes every spring without fail. They were still now. Deliberately still. "Longer than you think," she said quietly. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." "How much longer?" "I started hearing things in January. Vernon made a call at a restaurant in Savannah. He didn't know I was 2 tables away. I heard enough to understand what they were planning. January. 6 months. My mother had known for 6 months that my husband and his father were planning to destroy my marriage to steal my inheritance, and she had said nothing. She had called me on my birthday. She had mailed me a card with a pressed violet inside. She had asked about the weather, and whether I was eating enough, and whether the tomatoes on her patio were getting too much sun. 6 months of pleasant phone calls while she sat on a secret that could have saved me from the worst afternoon of my life. I wanted to be angry. Part of me was. But another part, the part that had watched Colleen's knife move through the meat without a tremor, understood something about silence. Sometimes you are quiet not because you have nothing to say, but because you are not yet sure anyone will listen. "What did you do?" I asked, after January. "What did you do with what you heard?" Alma stood up. The chair scraped softly on the wooden floor. She walked to the hallway closet, the one with the sticking door that you had to lift and push simultaneously. And I heard the hinges protest the way they had protested since I was 10 years old. She came back carrying a shoebox. It was old. The cardboard had softened with age, the corners rounded. On the lid, in faded blue ink, was my father's handwriting, his careful, slanted script. I recognized it the way you recognize a voice you haven't heard in decades, instantly, painfully, completely. Alma set the box on the wobbly table between us. "Everything your father left you," she said, "and everything I've been collecting since January." She lifted the lid. Inside, beneath a stack of my father's original patent documents, was a layer of materials that did not belong to a dead man. Printed emails, photographs taken from a distance, a spiral notebook filled with Alma's handwriting, dates, times, names, locations, page after page after page. My mother, the retired librarian, had been conducting an investigation for 6 months, and she had cataloged it the only way she knew how, meticulously, chronologically, with an index. I left Alma at the kitchen table with her shoebox and her index and went to the spare bedroom. The musty sheets smelled like a room that waited more than it was lived in. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled open the nightstand drawer where I had left my old phone 2 years ago during a visit factory reset, supposedly wiped, supposedly dead. The screen was cracked. The battery showed 4%. I plugged it into Alma's charger and waited, and when it flickered to life, I opened the settings and found what I was looking for: the message cache. The phone had been reset, but the cache had not been fully cleared. Fragments remained: timestamps, partial threads, ghost data that the factory wipe had failed to reach. Most of it was nothing. Old weather alerts, a coupon notification from a store that had closed. But buried in the fragments, dated 6 months before the barbecue, was a text from Grant's number to a contact saved only as a phone number. No name, no identification. Just 10 digits and a message that rearranged everything I thought I understood about my marriage. "Are you done yet? The deadline is my birthday. Don't let it show." I read it 3 times. The cracked screen glowed blue in the dark room. Outside, the Gulf wind pressed against the cottage windows, and I could hear the faint creak of Alma's footsteps, pausing outside my door, then moving on. She knew I needed to be alone with this. My birthday. The deadline was my birthday. Not a spontaneous revelation. Not a husband overcome by grief discovering his wife's betrayal. A production with a delivery date, a timeline, and a director making sure the cast stayed in character. 6 months. Think about that. Think about every dinner where he asked about my day. Every Sunday morning he brought me coffee in bed. Every Tuesday night he rubbed my shoulders while we watched television, and I leaned into him and felt safe. Behind each of those moments was a clock, and it had been ticking toward my destruction since January. The phone battery climbed to 11%. I screenshot the cached text and sent it to my own email. Then I sat in the dark and thought about what I had and what I needed. I had Alma's evidence. I had the cached text. I had a patent worth millions that my husband was trying to steal. What I did not have was proof that the photographs were fake. I knew they were. I had never met the man in those images, never sent those messages, never set foot in that hotel. But knowing and proving are separated by an ocean, and I needed someone who could build the bridge. I picked up my current phone and texted one person: Kendall Mercer, 44 years old. My college roommate at Florida State, where she had double majored in computer science and criminal justice, while I studied pharmaceutical regulation. She now worked as a digital forensics specialist at a private cybersecurity firm in Atlanta, the kind of person corporations hired when they suspected someone had doctored financial records or fabricated evidence. I had not spoken to her in 8 months. I sent her the photographs from the barbecue, the ones still saved on Grant's shared cloud that he had not yet thought to revoke my access to, with a single line: "Someone made these. Can you tell me who?" 2 minutes of silence, the longest 2 minutes of a day that had already lasted a lifetime. Then the reply appeared, letter by letter, the way Kendall always typed: no pleasantries, no preamble, just the scalpel. This photo is a composite. I can see the pixel layer at the edges. The lighting on your face doesn't match the lighting on his shoulder. Two different sources stitched together. Give me 48 hours. My heart was pounding. I typed back, 48 hours for what? To find out who made it and how much your husband paid them. Kendall read pixels the way a surgeon reads an X-ray. She did not see a photograph of an unfaithful wife in a hotel room. She saw the seams where someone had stitched a lie together and billed for the labor. She saw light angles that contradicted each other, shadow lines that belonged to different rooms. A composite assembled with professional software by someone who charged by the hour and left digital fingerprints on every layer. Grant's strongest weapon, the evidence that had silenced 20 people at my dinner table and made me walk out of my own home, was a forgery. And in 48 hours, Kendall would be able to prove who forged it. I set the phone on the nightstand beside the old one. Two phones, two pieces of evidence, two cracks in the wall Grant had built around me. The cracked screen still glowed with his 6-month-old text. The deadline is my birthday. Don't let it show. Alma's footsteps passed my door again. She was still awake, still pacing, still carrying the weight of whatever else was in that shoebox that we had not yet unpacked. I pressed my face into the cool pillow. My mouth was dry, I had not eaten since dawn, and the metallic taste of adrenaline had replaced everything else. Through the open window, the salt air drifted in from the Gulf, mixing with the lingering chamomile from earlier, and for a moment the room smelled like my childhood, like safety, like the years before Grant. For the first time since 3:15 that afternoon, I breathed out, slowly, deeply. The kind of breath you take when you realize you are not drowning, you are just learning to swim in deeper water. They thought I would sign while still in shock. They built a 6-month operation around my compliance, around the certainty that I would cry and beg and crumble and hand over everything my father had left me. They were wrong about me, and in 48 hours, Kendall was going to prove it. I didn't wait for Kendall's 48 hours. I drove back to Coral Gables at 5:40 in the morning with a spare key in my right hand and a list in my head. Passport, deeds, patent file, hard drive. 4 items, 15 minutes in and out before Grant opened his eyes. The street was empty and blue-gray, that particular shade of pre-dawn Florida where everything looks like an underexposed photograph. I parked 2 houses down. I walked to the front door in flat shoes, no purse phone in my back pocket. The spare key turned in the lock with a click so quiet it sounded like a secret. The house smelled wrong. Stale barbecue, leftover party food still on the kitchen counter, the ribs I had cooked, the corn salad, the coleslaw, all sitting out uncovered since yesterday afternoon. Nobody had cleaned up. Nobody had wrapped anything or loaded the dishwasher or wiped down the counters. That told me everything about what this house was without me in it. I started with photographs. Every room, every angle, every surface. The kitchen with its abandoned food. The dining room where the television still hung on the wall, dark now. The screen that had displayed my fabricated infidelity to 20 guests. The living room where nothing had moved. I photographed it all not because I knew what I would need, but because I had spent a decade in pharmaceutical regulation, and the first rule of any audit is document everything before you touch it. Then I went to the study. Grant's cologne lingered on the leather chair. The desk lamp was off. I turned it on, and the cone of yellow light fell across the mahogany surface like a spotlight on a crime scene. The safe was behind the bookshelf. I knew the combination because Grant had never imagined I would need to use it against him. 4 digits. Our wedding anniversary. I almost laughed. Passport. Land deeds for the Prescott farmstead in Ocala. 20 acres my father had owned since before I was born. The patent file, the original registration documents, the molecular compound data, the correspondence with the patent office, the external hard drive where Grant kept financial backups. I placed each item in the canvas bag I had brought and set it by the door. Grant's closet was still full. His shoes were still lined up by the bed. His watch sat on the nightstand, the expensive one Colleen had given him for his 45th birthday. He had not packed a single bag. He had not moved a single shirt. Because he had never planned to leave this house. He had planned for me to. I went back to the study. The desk had 3 drawers on the right side. The top one held pen stamps, a roll of tape. The second held hanging files, tax returns, insurance policies. The usual paper life of a marriage. The third drawer stuck when I pulled it. I lifted and pulled again, and it came free. Inside was a land transfer contract. The document was thick, professionally bound, tabbed with colored flags at every signature line. The header read, Transfer of Property Preliminary Agreement. Effective date July 14th, 2023. 3 weeks from now. The property described was the Prescott farmstead, my father's land, my inheritance, the 20 acres where I had learned to ride a bike, and where my father had built his lab. The contract would transfer ownership to a holding company called Coastal Bridge Partners, LLC. I had never heard that name in my life. The contract sat in that drawer the way a loaded gun sits in a bedside table, casual patient already aimed. Beneath it, half covered by a yellow legal pad with Grant's handwriting in the margins, was a printed email. I almost missed it. The paper was thin, the font small, and in the dim cone of the desk lamp it looked like nothing, a receipt, a confirmation junk. But I pulled it out and read it, and the room went very still. The email was from Grant's lawyer to Grant, dated 4 days before the barbecue. 3 lines. She will sign while still in shock. Don't let her recover. The window is 72 hours after that. She'll find counsel. I read it twice, 3 times. The words did not change. 72 hours. They had given themselves 72 hours to break me. 3 days between the ambush and the moment they assumed I would crumble, sign the land transfer, hand over my father's property, and walk away with nothing. After 72 hours, they calculated I would think clearly enough to hire a lawyer. So the contract had to be signed before the shock wore off. It had been 36 hours. I was ahead of schedule. I photographed the email. I photographed the contract, every page, every tab, every margin note in Grant's handwriting. I photographed the drawer, the legal pad, the position of every document exactly as I had found it. Then I put everything back. Every page aligned. Every tab in place. The legal pad covering the email at the same angle. The drawer pushed shut. I turned off the desk lamp. The study went dark. Upstairs, I heard the air conditioning cycle on, and beneath it the faint rhythm of Grant sleeping. The man who had given himself 3 days to dismantle my life was unconscious in a bed I had made yesterday morning, dreaming whatever dreams men dream when they believe their plans are working. Let him sleep. Let him count down his 72 hours. Let him believe I was curled up in my mother's spare room, weeping, broken, ready to sign. Because beneath that land transfer contract, half hidden under the legal pad, I had found one more document. A letter on Meridian Pharma letterhead, addressed to Grant. Regarding preliminary patent licensing terms, the land was worth $7 million, but the patent, my father's patent, was the real target. I locked the study door, walked out the front, and pulled it shut behind me. The mockingbird in the oak tree was already singing. It was 6:28 in the morning, and I had everything I needed. I sat in my car 2 houses down and read the Meridian Pharma letter by the light of my phone. Then I read the full email chain I had photographed, every page, every line, every number they thought I would never see. $13.5 million. That was what my marriage was worth. Not to me, to the people dismantling it. The email chain ran 4 messages deep. Grant's lawyer had laid it out with the clinical precision of a man who had done this before. If I signed the divorce agreement before July, the patent would be classified as marital property under Florida law, a technicality involving the date of the licensing offer relative to the date of separation. Combined with the farmstead, the total recoverable value to the Holloways was approximately $13.5 million. The land alone, the lawyer wrote, would cover Vernon's bridge loan. The patent was the prize. The last email in the chain was from Grant to his lawyer, one line: "She won't fight. She never does." I stared at that sentence until the screen dimmed. Then I locked my phone, started the engine, and drove back to Cedar Key. Let me say that number again so it stays with you. 13.5 million. That is what they calculated I was worth. Not as a wife, not as a mother, not as the woman who managed every dollar and cooked every meal and held every holiday together for 7 years. As a line item, a figure on a spreadsheet, an asset to be liquidated before the end of the quarter. Alma was waiting with coffee when I walked in. Black, bitter, strong. The first thing I had consumed since before the barbecue. She set the mug down and placed her hand on my shoulder for exactly 2 seconds. Not comfort, not pity, just contact. Then she sat across from me and watched as I laid every photograph out on her kitchen table one by one like a detective building a case board. The email chain, the land transfer contract, the Meridian letter, the 72-hour window. Alma studied each image without speaking, her reading glasses low on her nose. Her lips pressed into a line I had not seen since my father's funeral. "You need a lawyer," she said. "Today." "I know. There's a man in Tampa. Garrison Ellsworth. Margaret Henley from church recommended him. Her niece went through something similar 3 years ago. He's a family law partner. High asset cases." She slid a business card across the table. It had been sitting under her coffee mug, ready as if she had placed it there before I arrived. I looked at the name and felt a flicker of recognition. "Garrison Ellsworth," I said. "I know that name. MBA program at University of Florida. He was 2 years ahead of me." "Then he already knows you're not stupid," Alma said. "Call him." I called. Garrison Ellsworth answered on the third ring, 48 years old. A senior family law partner in Tampa, whose phone manner was so calm you might mistake him for a therapist until you heard the questions he asked. He listened to everything without interrupting. The barbecue, the photographs, the envelope I still hadn't opened, the land transfer contract, the email chain with the dollar figures and the deadline. Have you ever told a stranger the worst thing that has happened to you and heard them pause, not out of sympathy, but because they recognized a pattern they had seen before? Garrison paused. 2 seconds. Then his voice shifted into something more precise. "File first," he said. "Today. We don't let them set the narrative." "I don't have strong enough evidence yet," I said. "Kendall is still working on the photos. I only have my own photographs of documents I found in his desk." "You have a conspiracy email with a dollar figure and a deadline," Garrison said. "That's a sword, not a shield. We file today. We freeze the assets. We force them to respond on our timeline instead of theirs. Everything else we build during discovery." The salt air drifted through Alma's screen door. I could hear a boat motor somewhere on the Gulf, and closer the scratch of Alma's pen. She was taking notes on a legal pad. Because that was who my mother was, a woman who documented. "One more thing," Garrison said. "The lawyer who drafted your husband's petition. What's his name?" I pulled up the photograph of the divorce envelope, the one still sitting in my canvas bag, unopened, the name, typed beneath the law firm's letterhead. I read it to him. Silence. Not a pause this time. Silence. The kind that has weight. "I need to double-check something," Garrison said slowly. "That name sounds familiar. And not in a good way." He said he would call back in an hour. He called back in 20 minutes. His voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something sharper. The voice of a man who had just found a weapon he hadn't expected. "The lawyer who drafted your husband's petition," Garrison said. "His name is on a Florida bar disciplinary file. He was disbarred 3 years ago in Georgia for falsifying property records in a divorce case. The reinstatement in Florida went through, but the disciplinary record is public. Your husband hired a man with a documented history of forging exactly the kind of documents you just found in that desk drawer." I sat down on Alma's kitchen chair. The wood creaked. Through the window I could see the Cedar Key Marina, the boats rocking gently, the Pelican still on its piling. "So what does that mean for us?" I asked. It means the man they hired to destroy you has already destroyed himself once, Garrison said. And people who get caught doing something once usually didn't start that time. They started long before. We just have to find out when. Alma set down her pen. She looked at me across the table, her coffee untouched, her legal pad filled with notes in her precise librarian's hand. She did not smile, but something in her expression shifted the look of a woman who had been waiting 6 months for this exact moment. The counterattack had begun. What kind of man hires a lawyer who is disbarred for forging property records and then asks his wife to sign property documents? The kind of man who believes his wife will never check. Garrison walked me through it on a video call that morning, his Tampa skyline framed behind him like a postcard from a world where things still made sense. The disciplinary file was public record. Grant's attorney had falsified a deed transfer in a Georgia divorce 3 years earlier. Different state, different wife, same playbook. The Georgia bar had disbarred him. The Florida bar, in its infinite generosity, had reinstated him 18 months later. The file was permanent. Same pattern, Garrison said. His voice had the calm of a man laying cards on a table one at a time. Property-heavy divorce, fabricated documents, pressure campaign against the spouse. He ran this play before, and it worked until someone caught him. So we use it, I said. Not yet. Garrison leaned back in his chair. We save it. A disbarment record is a grenade, and you only throw a grenade when you know exactly where the target is standing. Right now, he doesn't know we have it. The moment we reveal it, he'll find new counsel and clean up his trail. We wait until he does something stupid in our case. And he will. Men like this always do, because the first time they got away with it long enough to believe they were clever. And in the meantime, we file today. I want our petition on the judge's desk before their window closes. They gave themselves 72 hours to break you. We're at hour 51. Let's make the last 21 count. Garrison filed the petition at noon. I sat in Alma's kitchen and watched the confirmation email arrive on my laptop. And for a moment the room felt very still, the way a room feels after a door has been locked from the inside. The salt air drifted through the screen door. Alma's coffee was cold. I had reheated it twice and forgotten to drink it both times. $45,000. I need you to sit with that number for a moment. That was what it cost to destroy my reputation at my own dinner table. Less than the price of the car Grant drove to the party. Less than what he spent on the patio renovation last spring. My entire identity wife partner. Faithful woman purchased and demolished for the cost of a mid-range SUV. Kendall called that afternoon. Her voice was flat and clinical, the voice she used when she was presenting findings rather than opinions. EME, Media Edge Solutions, she said. Registered in Orlando. On paper, a boutique media consultancy. In practice, they manufactured divorce evidence to order, custom composite photographs, fabricated text message threads, hotel metadata manipulation. The invoice was $45,000 charged to Holloway Commercial Realty's operating account under Media Consulting Services. I closed my eyes, and the man in the photographs, a commercial actor based in Orlando. His agency headshot matches the face in the composites. He signed a non-disclosure agreement with Media Edge 8 weeks before the barbecue. I have his agency listing his booking dates and the NDA signature page. How did you get the NDA? Media Edge dissolved their LLC 6 days after your husband's party. When companies dissolve that fast, they leave filing residue. The NDA was in the registered agent's archive documents. It took me 4 hours to find it, but it's there. They had not just faked a photograph. They had built a stage set, hired the actors, written the script, produced the show, and dissolved the production company before the credits rolled. And the only person in the audience who did not know it was fiction was me. Kendall, I said. They built an entire narrative. Hotel records, timestamps, text messages I never sent. This wasn't a man catching his wife cheating. This was a campaign. It was a $45,000 campaign, Kendall said. And they left a receipt. I hung up and sat in Alma's kitchen with two documents side by side on the table. On the left, Garrison's printout of the disciplinary file, a lawyer with a history of forging property records, now representing a man who needed property documents signed under duress. On the right, Kendall's forensic report, a $45,000 fabrication with a paper trail that led directly to Grant's business account. Two weapons. Garrison had the lawyer's past, Kendall had the photograph's provenance, and Grant still believed I was curled up in my mother's spare room, too shattered to think, too broken to fight. Counting down toward a signature he would never get. Alma appeared in the doorway. She looked at the documents on her table, the laptop still open to Garrison's filed petition, the cold coffee I had not touched. She did not ask what I had found. She simply set a fresh mug beside me and said, "Eat something. You'll need your strength." My phone buzzed against the wooden table. Grant's name on the screen. The first direct contact since the barbecue. I watched it ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. 4. 5. I answered on the 5th ring. Not because I was hesitant, because I wanted him to wonder whether I would answer at all. "My lawyer tells me you haven't opened the envelope," Grant said. His voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man reading from a script that was no longer tracking. "We need to talk about the terms before this gets complicated." I looked at Alma across the kitchen. She was watching me the way she had watched me the night I arrived, patient, steady, armed with the quiet certainty of a woman who had been preparing for this longer than anyone knew. "It's already complicated, Grant," I said. "Your lawyer should check his mail. You'll find my petition got there first." I hung up before he could respond. The phone sat on the table, dark and silent. The coffee was still warm. Outside, the cedar key gulls called over the marina, and the afternoon light came through the screen door in long gold bars across the floor. Garrison had filed. Kendall had delivered. And Grant's 72-hour window had just shattered from the inside. 1 week after I told Grant his plan had failed, I walked into the Hillsborough County Courthouse beside Garrison Ellsworth, wearing a navy blazer I had bought at a consignment shop in Cedar Key, because every suit I owned was still hanging in a closet in Coral Gables. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and other people's endings. Families in various stages of collapse sat on benches along the hallway, clutching folders, avoiding eye contact. I had been one of them a week ago, blindsided, broken, clutching an envelope I hadn't opened. Today, I was something different. Today, I had filed first. Grant was already seated at the respondent's table when we entered. His lawyer sat beside him, adjusting a stack of papers with the practiced ease of a man who had done this many times, which, as I now knew, included at least one time that had ended in disbarment. Grant looked up when the door opened, and for a moment his face went slack. Not angry, not defiant, blank. The look of a man who had walked into a meeting expecting to chair it and discovered someone else was already at the head of the table. The clerk called our case number. My case number. Filed 3 days before Grant's lawyer had even submitted his petition. Judge Whitfield entered from chambers, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 60s who handled temporary orders with the brisk efficiency of someone who had spent decades sorting lies from leverage. She peered over her reading glasses at both tables, opened the file, and nodded at Garrison. "Counsel for the petitioner, you may proceed." Garrison stood. He was calm, the way deep water is calm, still on the surface, enormous underneath. He presented 3 exhibits. The forensic imaging report proving the infidelity photographs were manufactured composites, the conspiracy email outlining the asset seizure plan and its deadline, and the invoice from Grant's company account showing exactly what the fabrication had cost. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform outrage. He laid each document before the judge the way a mechanic lays parts on a workbench, methodically, without drama, letting the evidence speak for itself. "Your Honor," Garrison said, "the respondent fabricated evidence of infidelity, served divorce papers as a public ambush before 20 witnesses, and has a property transfer contract with a 3-week deadline targeting the petitioner's separate inherited assets. We request an immediate freeze on all transfers of the Prescott farmstead and the associated pharmaceutical patent." Grant looked at me across that courtroom aisle for the first time since the barbecue. And I saw it. Not anger, not guilt, but bewilderment. Pure, undiluted bewilderment. He had genuinely not imagined this version of me existed. 7 years of cooking his meals and managing his portfolio and organizing his holidays, and he still did not know who I was. He had married a woman he never bothered to see. Grant's lawyer stood and offered a defense about marital privacy and the sanctity of settlement negotiations. It was thin. Judge Whitfield listened with the patience of a woman who was going to rule against him and wanted to give him the courtesy of finishing his sentence first. She signed the temporary order in less than a minute. All asset transfers frozen. The farmstead, the patent, every account connected to the marital estate locked. Grant's lawyer asked for a timeline for the main hearing. Judge Whitfield looked at him over her glasses. "You'll receive the scheduling order by Friday, counsel. I suggest your client use the time wisely. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who is supposed to love you, you know the feeling. It is not rage. It is not sadness. It is the cold, clean satisfaction of watching them realize their mistake in real time, the moment when the person who dismissed you for years looks at you across a courtroom and understands for the first time that you were always the most dangerous person in the room. They just never gave you a reason to prove it." We walked out through the marble hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Garrison carried his briefcase in one hand and said nothing, because he was the kind of lawyer who knew when silence was the best closing argument. Grant caught us at the courthouse steps. He came from the side, fast, his lawyer trailing behind with a hand raised in caution that Grant ignored. He stepped close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same brand he had worn on our wedding day. The same brand that still lingered on the leather chair in his study, where I had found the documents that brought us here. "You don't know who you're playing with, Lorraine," he said. His voice was low, tight, meant for me alone. "Drop this before it gets worse." I looked at him. The Tampa heat pressed down on us. The asphalt shimmered. Behind him, a couple walked out of the courthouse holding hands, some other story, some other ending. I thought about all the meals I had cooked, all the parties I had hosted, all the mornings I had tied that apron and disappeared into a role he had written for me. "You don't know either," I said. I walked past him without breaking stride. Garrison opened the passenger door of his car. I got in and pressed my trembling hands into my lap. Not fear. Adrenaline. The high-frequency vibration of a fight fought and won the first small battle of a war I had not started, but was now determined to finish. "That went well," Garrison said, pulling onto the street. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted, the warmth draining into something more careful. "Lorraine," he said, "I need to tell you something about the recording your mother has, the one from the restaurant in Savannah." "What about it?" "Florida is a two-party consent state. If Vernon didn't know he was being recorded, that audio may not be admissible in a Florida court." The car turned onto the interstate. The courthouse shrank in the side mirror. And the victory I had felt 60 seconds ago developed its first crack. That evening at Alma's cottage, the two-party consent problem sat between us like a wall. Garrison's warning echoed in my head: our strongest evidence might be legally worthless. But Alma had asked me to come to the kitchen after dinner, and when I sat down, she placed her phone on the table between us, the way someone sets down a loaded weapon. Carefully, with both hands, like she knew what it could do. "Play it," I said. Alma tapped the screen. The green waveform began to pulse. Vernon's voice filled the kitchen. Unmistakable, that low, unhurried cadence, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years giving orders and never once doubting they would be followed. He was speaking to someone I couldn't identify, though the context made it clear: Grant's lawyer. "Patent must be transferred before July, Keneem," Vernon said. "Your son needs to deal with his wife. Use fake adultery evidence. Hire someone to do it properly. She will sign while still in shock." I heard silverware clinking in the background. The ambient noise of a restaurant, other conversations, a server passing. The soft percussion of a dining room operating as though nothing extraordinary were happening at table 12. Vernon had ordered the destruction of my life over dinner. From the sound of it, he had ordered dessert too. The recording ran 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Vernon outlined the timeline, the budget, the division of assets he expected once I had been removed. He discussed my father's patent with the bored fluency of a man reviewing a quarterly report. He mentioned the farmstead. He mentioned the holding company. He mentioned once my name, not with malice, not with guilt, but with the flat indifference of someone referring to an obstacle that would soon be cleared. 4 minutes and 11 seconds. That is how long it takes to hear your entire marriage reduced to a transaction. I listened to every second, and when it ended, the silence in Alma's kitchen was louder than Vernon's voice had been. Alma sat with her hands folded in her lap, steady, deliberate. The posture of a woman who had listened to this recording dozens of times and had long since moved past the horror into something colder and more useful. "When did you record this?" I asked. "March, 3 months before the party." 3 months. I set down my tea. It had gone cold and bitter 20 minutes ago. You knew for 3 months. You knew what they were planning. You knew about the fake photographs, the patent, the land transfer, and you let me walk into that barbecue blind. Alma did not flinch. She did not look away. She held my gaze with the steady focus of a woman who had anticipated this question and had spent 90 days preparing her answer. "Yes," she said. "Why, can you forgive the person who let you get hurt if they did it? Because they knew it was the only way to make you strong enough to win. Because I wanted to make sure you were ready to fight," Alma said. "Not just run away." The Gulf wind pushed against the cottage windows. The dish soap scent from dinner still hung in the air, mixing with the salt breeze and the faint trace of baked fish. My mother's kitchen, the safest room I had ever known, suddenly felt like a place where hard truths lived. "If I had told you in March," Alma continued, "you would have confronted Grant. Immediately. You would have screamed or cried or packed a bag, and he would have adjusted. He would have moved the documents, changed the timeline, found a new lawyer. Vernon would have covered his tracks, and we would have lost everything. So you let me get ambushed. I let you get angry." She paused. "There is a difference. Ambushed women call their mothers crying. Angry women call their lawyers. I needed you to be angry, Lorraine. And I needed Grant to believe he had won long enough for him to leave every piece of evidence exactly where we could find it." I stared at her. The woman who had alphabetized her spice rack. The woman who had ironed her pillowcases and mailed birthday cards 3 days early. That woman had conducted a 3-month intelligence operation and made the calculated decision to let her daughter walk into an ambush because she knew with the patience of a librarian and the precision of a strategist that the ambush itself would become the weapon. I wanted to hate her for it. I could not. Because she was right. If she had warned me in March, I would have confronted Grant at the kitchen table and he would have hidden every document, fired his compromised lawyer, and rebuilt his plan with better camouflage. Instead, he had executed his scheme believing it was flawless, and in doing so, he had left a trail so clear that even a courtroom could follow it. Alma reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her fingers were warm. The rough wood grain pressed against my knuckles. "I am sorry," she said quietly, "for the pain, not for the decision." I turned my hand over and held hers. We sat like that for a long moment, 2 women in a small kitchen on the Gulf Coast, bound by something more complicated than love and simpler than forgiveness. Then I asked the question that had been circling since Garrison's warning in the car. "The recording," I said. "Florida is a 2-party consent state. If Vernon didn't know you were recording, we can't use it." Alma looked at me, and there it was again, that expression I had first seen the night I arrived. Not worry, not hope. The calm of a woman who had thought about this for 90 days and already solved the problem. "The restaurant was in Savannah," she said. "Georgia, I checked before I pressed record." She paused. "Georgia is a 1-party consent state." The kitchen was quiet. The Gulf wind settled. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I stopped being surprised by my mother and started being grateful. Garrison confirmed it within a week. The Georgia recording was admissible in Florida court under federal rules governing interstate evidence. Alma's patience had not just been strategic, it had been legally precise. With that weapon secured, we turned to the money. Boyd Stanton laid 3 folders on the conference table the way a doctor lays out test results one at a time. Worst news last. 50 years old, wire-rimmed glasses. The demeanor of a man who found spreadsheets more interesting than people. Garrison had retained him as our forensic accountant, and within 3 weeks of accessing Grant's financial disclosures, Boyd had found enough to fill a conference room. 3 transactions, Boyd said. He opened the first folder. The payment to Media Edge, we already knew about that. $45,000 categorized as media consulting. Confirmed fabrication expense. He opened the second folder. This one is different. $120,000 paid in 4 installments from Holloway Commercial Realty to an LLC called Coastal Bridge Partners. The company doesn't appear in any Florida state business registry. No website, no employees, no office. Just a registered agent and a signatory. He slid a printout across the table. A name was circled in red. The signatory's name matches a man who appears in your father-in-law's old clinic network filings, Boyd said. 15 years ago, Vernon Holloway's health network was investigated for insurance fraud. The case was closed, insufficient evidence. But the man who co-signed 3 of the clinic's insurance claims is the same man who controls Coastal Bridge Partners. $120,000 to a ghost company controlled by Vernon's former business partner. A partner from a case the FBI had once investigated and quietly dropped. And all of it flowing through the same business account that had paid to fabricate photographs of an affair I never had. The third transaction, Boyd continued opening the last folder, is $38,000 paid for legal consulting with no corresponding invoice, no retainer agreement, and no identifiable recipient. It's just gone. Garrison leaned back in his chair. The Tampa skyline glittered behind him. How long to trace it all? 3 weeks, Boyd said. Maybe 4. But I'll tell you now, this isn't just a divorce. This is a money trail with roots. I sat in that conference room with a glass of flat water and the cold certainty that my marriage had been a front, not just for a man who didn't love me, but for a family whose finances required someone else's assets to stay solvent. The patent, the farmstead, the fabricated infidelity. None of it was personal. All of it was arithmetic. That evening, I was on Alma's front porch watching the sun drop behind the Cedar Key Marina when I heard tires on gravel. A car I recognized. Grant's silver sedan, the one he kept immaculate, now dusty from a 3.5-hour drive. He got out slowly. Tie loosened, shirt untucked, eyes bloodshot in the yellow porch light. He looked like a man who had been arguing with someone for hours and lost. "Lorraine," he said, "please, just listen." The night jasmine along Alma's fence released its scent into the warm air. The salt marsh hummed with insects. I stayed on the top step and did not move. "My father planned everything," Grant said. He stood at the bottom of the steps, hands open at his sides, palms up, the posture of surrender or performance. And I could no longer tell the difference. The photos, the contract, the timing. I was trying to protect us. I had no choice. "You had a choice every morning for 6 months," I said. "You chose the plan. You don't understand what he's like. I understand exactly what he's like." I sat across from him at every holiday dinner for 7 years and watched him calculate the value of everything he looked at. The difference between us is that you saw it too, and you decided to help him. For one moment, just one, I saw the man I had married. Not the schemer, not the coward who had projected fabricated evidence on a television screen in front of 20 guests. The boy who grew up under Vernon Holloway's fist and never learned how to say no. His chin trembled. His eyes were wet. And I believed, for exactly that moment, that some part of him was sorry. Then the moment passed. Grant's jaw tightened. His hands dropped. The openness drained from his posture like water from a cracked glass, and underneath it was something harder. Something inherited. "Withdraw the lawsuit," he said. His voice was different now. Lower, flatter Vernon's cadence wearing his son's face. "My father has things that can destroy you. Things you don't know about." The porch light buzzed. A moth circled it. Inside the cottage, I could hear Alma moving in the kitchen, running water, putting away dishes. The quiet sounds of a woman who was listening to everything through the screen door. "See you in court," I said. I stepped inside and closed the door. The latch clicked. Grant stood on the porch for another 30 seconds. I watched his shadow through the curtain, and then his shoes crunched on the gravel. The car door opened and closed, and the engine faded down the road toward the highway. Alma appeared in the hallway, arms crossed. "He'll come back," she said. "They always come back when they're scared." I nodded. But it was not Grant's visit that kept me awake that night. It was what Boyd had said about Coastal Bridge Partners, a company connected to Vernon's past, funded by Grant's present. Controlled by a man whose name appeared in a 15-year-old fraud investigation that the FBI had closed for lack of evidence. The question circled in the dark above my bed like the moth around Alma's porch light. If that case was closed 15 years ago, what was $120,000 in fresh money doing flowing to the same man now? Boyd answered the question about Coastal Bridge Partners 3 weeks later. The registered agent was a man named Darren Foyle, Vernon's co-defendant in the insurance fraud investigation that the FBI had closed 15 years ago. But before Boyd could finish tracing the money, something worse arrived in my inbox. The email from Meridian Pharma landed at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning. Subject line: Urgent Unauthorized Patent Representation. I read it standing in Alma's kitchen with coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, and by the second paragraph, the coffee was forgotten. Someone had submitted a power of attorney to Meridian's legal department. The document bore my signature, my full name, in cursive. On a line I had never touched, authorizing a third party to negotiate the patent license on my behalf. The document was dated 3 weeks prior. The third party was listed as Coastal Bridge Partners, LLC. I called Garrison before I finished reading. "A forged power of attorney is a felony in Florida," he said. His voice had the particular calm of a man who has just been handed a weapon he did not expect. "We file criminal charges today. Forgery and attempted fraud. This isn't civil court anymore. This is criminally." We drove to Jacksonville together. 5.5 hours on I-10 through the flat September sprawl of north-central Florida, the highway shimmering with heat. Garrison's leather seats warm against my back. He spent most of the drive on the phone with his paralegal dictating the criminal complaint. I spent most of it staring out the window, turning over the same thought: they had forged my name. Think about that for a moment. They did not just lie about me at a dinner table. They did not just fabricate photographs. They forged my signature on a legal document, a document that would have transferred negotiating authority over my father's patent to a shell company controlled by my father-in-law's former fraud partner. They put my name on paper I never touched in handwriting that was not mine, and submitted it to a corporation expecting no one to check. The arrogance of it staggered me, not because it was bold, but because it was lazy. They had built a scheme worth millions and protected it with a forgery that any competent lawyer would catch in a single phone call. Vernon had spent decades getting away with things, and it had made him careless. Carelessness in a man that powerful is not a flaw. It is a gift to the person he underestimates. Meridian Pharma's offices overlooked the St. Johns River from the 14th floor of a glass tower in downtown Jacksonville. Dr. Harlan Graves met us in the conference room. Meridian's director of patent licensing, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a handshake that meant business and an expression that meant someone was going to answer for wasting his time. He slid the forged power of attorney across the conference table. I looked at it under the fluorescent light. The paper was expensive, heavy stock embossed letterhead, the kind of document designed to look legitimate at first glance. My name was written in a smooth, confident hand that bore no resemblance to my actual signature. Whoever had forged it had not even bothered to study my handwriting. They had invented one. We flagged it during standard verification, Dr. Graves said. His tone was flat professional, disgusted. The signature didn't match the one on file from your father's original registration. We contacted you immediately. And the third party? Garrison asked. Coastal Bridge Partners. They've been in contact with our acquisitions team for 6 weeks. We've frozen all third-party negotiations effective immediately. Dr. Graves looked at me directly. We do not negotiate with forgers, Mrs. Prescott. The licensing contract remains valid with you and only you. I signed the criminal complaint at the conference table using my actual signature, feeling the pen's weight in my hand, the way you feel gravity after weeks of weightlessness. Each stroke was deliberate. Each letter was mine. Walking out of Meridian's glass-walled offices felt like stepping out of a hospital after a clean scan. The diagnosis was not death. It was a fight. And for the first time since June, the odds were shifting in my direction. We stopped at a roadside diner outside Gainesville on the drive home. I ordered a club sandwich and ate every bite, the first meal I had finished with actual appetite in months. The bread was slightly stale and the bacon was overcooked. And it was the best thing I had tasted since before the barbecue. For the first time since Grant tapped his glass at the birthday table, I smiled. Not a polite smile, not a brave smile. A real one, the kind that starts in your chest and reaches your face before you can stop it. Garrison noticed. He said nothing. He was the kind of man who understood that some victories are private. We were past Gainesville, the sun dropping behind us when Garrison broke the silence. Boyd called while we were in the meeting, he said. His eyes stayed on the road. The registered agent for Coastal Bridge Partners, Darren Foyle. Boyd confirmed he was Vernon's co-defendant in the insurance fraud investigation. Same man, same network. 15 years later, still moving money for the same family. What did Boyd do? He reported it to the FBI this morning. The highway stretched ahead in the fading light. The car hummed. I pressed my hands against my knees and felt beneath the exhaustion and the fury and the strange new satisfaction of fighting back. Something I had not felt in a very long time. Momentum. The Holloways had forged my signature, and in doing so, they had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Civil manipulation was a chess game. Criminal forgery was a confession. And now Boyd had handed that confession along with 15 years of connected financial fraud to the federal government. The net was tightening, and for the first time, I was not the one caught inside it. Have you ever watched powerful people start to panic, not in loud, obvious ways, but in the small ones? The sudden kindness, the offers that arrive too fast and too generous. The words they never used before deployed now like currency they just discovered in a drawer. The FBI report detonated inside the Holloway family like a grenade thrown into a closed room. I did not hear the explosion directly. I heard the aftermath, the scrambling, the phone calls, the sudden generosity of people who had never been generous to me before. Boyd had confirmed it at Garrison's office the week prior. The connection between Coastal Bridge Partners and Vernon's past was not a coincidence. It was a continuation. The same man, the same network, the same pattern, only now there was a paper trail of fresh money linking it all together, and that trail was sitting on the desk of the FBI's white-collar crime division in Tampa. Once the Bureau assigns an agent, Boyd had said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with the calm of a man who dealt in numbers and let other people deal in fear. They'll want Grant's company records. All of them. Garrison had leaned forward. The FBI will take months, maybe a year, but the fact that they're looking changes everything. Vernon can't risk a trial that opens his books to a federal auditor. He was right. Within days, the offers began. Vernon contacted me through 3 different channels in 72 hours. First, his lawyer called Garrison's office with a settlement proposal. Then a voicemail from an intermediary appeared on my phone, a polished, neutral voice I did not recognize reading from a script. $2 million, the voicemail said. The patent stays with you. All we ask is that you withdraw the forensic accountant's inquiry. This can all be over by Christmas. $2 million. 3 months earlier, they had offered $800,000 through Grant's original divorce terms, the envelope I still had not opened. The number had more than doubled. Not because my case had gotten stronger, though it had. Because their fear had. Then Vernon tried a landline. He called Alma's cottage directly, a number he should not have had, which meant someone in his network had searched for it. Alma answered, listened for 4 seconds, and hung up without speaking. She set the phone back in its cradle and said, "He sounds old." I forwarded every voicemail to Garrison, every text, every intermediary contact. He logged each one as evidence of harassment and desperation, a documented pattern of a family trying to buy silence from a woman they had tried to destroy. "Don't respond to any of them," Garrison said. "Let them keep calling. Every contact is another exhibit." That evening, I reheated leftover soup in Alma's kitchen lentil from a pot she had made 3 days ago, warm and simple. The kind of meal that does not perform. I ate at the wobbly table and scrolled through my phone, cataloging the day's contacts when a text arrived from a number I had not seen in months. Colleen Holloway, the woman who had criticized my napkins. The woman who had cut her meat in precise strokes, while fabricated photographs of my infidelity played on a screen behind her. The woman who, in 7 years of holiday dinners and birthday parties and Sunday brunches, had never once called me anything warmer than Lorraine dear. The text read, "Daughter, can our family talk? I know things haven't been easy. Please call me." Daughter. One word on a glowing screen. 7 years of the napkins are linen, and it's not as if she has a career, and I thought we discussed cotton, and now suddenly daughter. As if the word had been sitting in a drawer beside the good silverware waiting for the occasion desperate enough to bring it out. Fear is the only thing that ever taught that woman tenderness. I stared at the text for a long time. The screen dimmed. I tapped it back to life. Daughter. The word looked wrong in Colleen's mouth, even in text form, like a coat that did not fit. Borrowed for an event she had not been invited to. I called Garrison. "She's never called me daughter," I said. "Not once in 7 years." A pause. Then Garrison's voice, careful and precise. "They're shifting strategy. Vernon's offer didn't work, so now they're sending Colleen for the emotional approach. It's coordinated." "I know it's coordinated," I said. "That's not what bothers me. What bothers me is that it means they're not afraid of me, Garrison. They're not afraid of the divorce or the forgery charges or losing the assets. They're afraid of the FBI." Silence on the line. The Gulf wind pressed against Alma's windows. The cottage creaked. "Yes," Garrison said quietly. "They are." I hung up and sat in the dark. Alma had gone to bed. The soup bowl was empty in the sink. The salt marsh hummed through the screen door. And somewhere out on the water, a boat motor puttered in the distance. I did the math. Vernon had offered $2 million to make this go away. The patent alone was worth $12 million. The farmstead was worth $7 million. He was willing to lose $2 million to avoid losing everything, which meant whatever the FBI would find in those company records was worth more than $19 million to keep hidden. $19 million. That was the number that kept me awake. Not the settlement offer, not Colleen's borrowed tenderness, not even the FBI report. $19 million in assets. And Vernon was willing to surrender 2 of them just to keep the other 17 in the dark. I pulled the bedsheets tight around me in Alma's spare room. The phone sat on the nightstand, Colleen's text still glowing. Daughter. I did not reply. I did not need to. The word told me everything I needed to know about where this was heading. They were not negotiating. They were begging. And people who beg have already calculated what they are willing to lose. I did not accept Vernon's offer. I did not reply to Colleen's text. I let the silence do what silence does best, make desperate people more desperate. In November, an envelope appeared on Alma's doorstep. No return address, no postmark, no stamp. Just my name. Written in handwriting I recognized from 1,000 birthday cards and grocery lists and library checkout slips. My mother's. I picked it up from the mat and carried it inside. Alma was at the kitchen table with her chamomile tea, and she watched me hold the envelope without saying a word. I tore it open. Inside was a photograph. The image was sharp, taken from a distance, but with a good lens. It showed two men at a conference table in what appeared to be a law office, dark wood leather chairs. A window behind them showing a Tampa skyline I recognized. The first man was Grant, pen in hand, leaning over a document with the concentrated focus of someone signing something important. The second man was Vernon, standing beside him, index finger pointing at a line on the page. The date stamp in the bottom right corner read, October 28th, 2024. 2 weeks after the court order had frozen all asset transfers. In the bottom left corner, in small, neat cursive, Alma Prescott. I looked up at my mother. "Mom," I said, "is this your signature?" Alma set down her tea. Her hands were folded the way they always were when she was about to say something she had been thinking about for a long time. "I have more than you think," she said. "I've been watching them since the day you walked out of that house." My mother, 70 years old, retired school librarian, the woman who pressed wildflowers into books and hummed hymns while she cooked and organized her shelves by Dewey Decimal out of habit. She had been running surveillance on my father-in-law for over a year and never said a word. She had a contact near Vernon's office, she would not tell me who, only that it was someone who owed her a favor from a long time ago, and through that contact she had been tracking the Holloway's movements meetings and document signing since the day I arrived at her cottage. "They signed a transfer document 2 weeks after the freeze order," I said. "That's contempt of court." "That's why I took the picture," Alma said. I held the photograph under the kitchen light. Grant's face was unmistakable, pen in hand, eyes on the page, completely unaware that he was being documented. Vernon beside him, finger on the line, directing the signature the way he had directed everything in this family for decades. Two men signing away frozen assets in broad daylight, caught by a woman they had never once considered a threat. Before I tell you what Garrison said when he saw this photograph, I need to pause. If you're still with me right now, comment your guess. What do you think happens when a judge sees proof that a court order was violated? Please note, some details ahead are adapted for storytelling purposes. The message behind them is what matters. I sent the photograph to Garrison. 3 minutes of silence. Then my phone rang. "Contempt of court," Garrison said. His voice had shifted into that sharp, focused register I had come to recognize as the sound of a lawyer who has just been handed a loaded gun. "Violation of a judicial order. Potential evidence tampering. They signed a property document while the freeze was active. Can we use it?" "Use it, Lorraine. They just shot themselves in the foot. This goes in front of the judge before trial. Contempt carries sanctions, fines, and in egregious cases, adverse inference. The judge can assume the worst about anything they're hiding. This photograph is a gift. How do you thank someone who let you believe you were fighting alone, only to discover they were building an arsenal behind you the entire time? How do you look at the woman who raised you and reconcile the mother who packed your school lunches with the operative who spent 14 months collecting evidence like a librarian cataloging a war? I set the phone down and looked at Alma across the table. She was drinking her tea. The same chamomile blend from the night she told me about the patent, the same wobbly table, the same pendant lamp. But the woman sitting across from me was not the same woman I had driven to that night in June. Or maybe she was, and I had simply never seen her clearly. "Mom," I said, "how many more of these do you have?" She smiled. Not a warm smile. A librarian's smile, the kind you give when someone finally finds the book they've been looking for. "Enough," she said. Garrison called back an hour later. The Gulf wind rattled the cottage shutters. Alma had gone to wash the teacups, and I stood alone in the kitchen holding my phone, listening to his voice deliver 2 sentences that changed the shape of everything. "I'm filing the contempt motion tomorrow," Garrison said. "But Lorraine, there's something else. Grant's lawyer. The Florida bar just suspended his license pending their investigation into the forged power of attorney. Your husband has no attorney 3 weeks before trial." I leaned against the kitchen counter. The photograph sat on the table beside Alma's empty teacup. Grant and Vernon caught mid-signature, frozen in an act of defiance against a court order they believed no one was watching. But someone had been watching. Someone had always been watching. I looked toward the kitchen sink where my mother was drying her hands on a towel. 70 years old, 5'3", the most dangerous person in this story, and no one had ever seen her coming. Not Vernon, not Grant, not even me. The trial was 3 weeks away. Grant had no lawyer. The contempt motion was ready. The FBI was in the background. And my mother had enough photographs to wallpaper a courtroom. For the first time since this began, I was not catching up. I was ahead. Garrison warned me not to celebrate. He called the morning after the bar suspension news, and his voice carried the careful weight of a man who had seen too many cases turn on a single unpredictable moment. Grant has 3 options, he said. Find new counsel willing to take a complex fraud and property case 3 weeks before trial. Request a continuance, which Judge Whitfield is unlikely to grant given our contempt motion, or represent himself. And if he represents himself, then he's dangerous in a different way. Unrepresented parties sometimes make emotional speeches that sway sympathy. Judges know better, but juries and galleries don't always. A man standing alone in a courtroom telling his story without a lawyer can look like a victim even when he's the architect of everything. I absorbed this. The legal ground had shifted entirely in my favor, but the human danger had not disappeared. Grant was still Grant, charming, adaptive, capable of performing sincerity the way other people perform card tricks. Garrison confirmed the trial date, first week of December. He reviewed what we would present the full evidence package, assembled over 18 months of work by people the Holloways had never seen coming. He listed each piece with the quiet satisfaction of a man counting ammunition before a battle he intended to win. We have more evidence than most divorce attorneys see in a career, he said. I hung up and sat in the stillness of Alma's cottage. On the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker was a timer shaped like a rooster, ceramic faded red, chipped at the beak. I had not noticed it before, but now I recognized it. It was the same timer that had sat on the counter of the Prescott farmstead kitchen when I was a child. My father had used it to time his experiments in the lab out back. My mother must have taken it when she left 31 years ago. The tiny theft felt enormous, a piece of the farmstead smuggled into exile, kept on a counter in a cottage 200 miles away, ticking out the minutes of a life rebuilt from scratch. I realized sitting there that I was not afraid of the trial. I was afraid of what came after. For 18 months, my life had been organized around a single purpose: fight back, build the case, survive. The trial was the destination I had been walking toward since the night I drove to Cedar Key. And when it was over, win or lose, I would have to answer a question I had been avoiding. Who am I when I am not fighting? That night, I could not sleep. I lay in Alma's spare room listening to the Gulf wind and the tick of my own thoughts until midnight, then gave up and walked to the kitchen. Alma was already there. She sat at the wobbly table with both hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile, wearing a cardigan. I had seen 100 times, her reading glasses pushed up into her hair. She did not look surprised to see me. She simply reached for the kettle and poured a second mug. We sat in silence for a long time. The kind of silence that does not need to be filled because it is already full of everything we had been through, everything we had built together. Everything that would happen tomorrow in a courtroom 2 hours away. The cottage refrigerator hummed in the corner, a low, steady drone. I had not thought about that sound in 30 years, but I recognized it instantly, the same hum as the farmstead refrigerator. The one I used to fall asleep to as a child, lying on the kitchen floor with a blanket while my father worked late in his lab. The sound of safety. The sound of home. The night before I left your father, Alma said quietly, I sat in the farmstead kitchen, not this kitchen, that one, and I wrote you a letter. I looked at her. She was staring into her tea. You were 12, she continued. I wrote you 3 pages explaining everything, why I was leaving, what Vernon had done, why I couldn't stay. I sealed it. I addressed it. And then I sat there for 2 hours trying to decide whether to leave it on your nightstand or take it with me. What did you decide? I took it with me, because I was afraid that if you read it and still chose him, I wouldn't survive that. So I kept the letter and I left without it. And I've carried it ever since. She stood up, slowly walked to the kitchen drawer, the one beneath the rooster timer, and pulled out a yellowed envelope. The paper had softened with age. The edges were round. My name was written on the front in my mother's handwriting from 31 years ago. Younger, sharper. The penmanship of a woman who had not yet learned that some things cannot be explained in 3 pages. Alma set it on the table between us. I looked at it for a long time. The envelope, the handwriting, the 31 years of silence. It represented not the silence of a woman who did not care, but the silence of a woman who cared so much she could not risk being rejected by the one person whose rejection would have ended her. I did not open it. I don't need to read it, I said. I already know what it says. You were afraid. And you left anyway. And that was enough. Alma's eyes filled. She did not cry. She reached across the wobbly table and I took her hand. Her fingers were warm and thin and steady. I'm not going to tell you to be brave tomorrow, she said. You've been brave for 18 months. I'm just waiting for you to be ready. I squeezed her hand. The refrigerator hummed. The Gulf wind settled. The rooster timer sat on the counter above the drawer, where a letter had waited 31 years to not be read. I'm ready, I said. The Hillsborough County Courthouse smelled like floor polish and old paper. I walked through the metal detector at 8:47 in the morning, and the machine beeped twice before the bailiff waved me through. My hands had not stopped shaking since the parking garage. Garrison was already inside, briefcase open on the plaintiff's table, arranging exhibits, with the focused calm of a man who had done this 1,000 times. He glanced at my hands and said nothing. He simply nodded toward the chair beside him. I sat down. The wood was cold beneath my palms. The courtroom filled slowly. Lawyers with other cases, a clerk organizing files, 2 reporters in the gallery. Garrison had warned me about them. And then Grant walked in. He was not alone. Beside him was a tall, prematurely gray man in a charcoal suit who moved with the confident stride of someone who had not yet realized he was outmatched. Russell Ames, Grant's replacement attorney and insurance litigator out of Fort Lauderdale, who had taken the case for the retainer 3 weeks ago and, from the size of the file he carried, had not finished reading it. Grant sat 12 feet away. 12 feet. I had slept beside that man for 7 years, shared a bathroom, a kitchen, a bed, a life. Now a bailiff stood between us like a referee, and Grant looked at the table in front of him with the rigid composure of a man who had practiced not looking at me. His suit was new, ill-fitting, slightly tight across the shoulders, the jacket pulling when he moved. He had bought it for today. The old Grant, the one who closed deals with a smile and a linen shirt, would never have worn a suit that did not fit. This Grant was improvising, and improvisation in a courtroom is another word for desperation. Judge Reginald Harmon entered from chambers at 9 sharp. A broad-shouldered man in his late 60s with reading glasses perpetually at the tip of his nose. He presided from the bench with the unhurried authority of someone who had spent decades separating lies from truth and had long since stopped being impressed by either. He opened the file, scanned both tables, and called the case. Russell Ames stood first. He buttoned his jacket, cleared his throat, and delivered his opening with the polished confidence of a man who had prepared a speech, but not a strategy. Your Honor, this case is straightforward, he began. Mrs. Holloway chose domesticity. She chose to leave a promising career and become a homemaker. That choice, however admirable, does not entitle her to half of what my client built during this marriage. Mr. Holloway managed a commercial real estate firm, generated revenue, assumed risk. His wife managed the household. These are not equivalent contributions, and the court should not treat them as such. He sat down. It had taken him 4 minutes. I noticed he did not mention the fabricated photographs. He did not mention the forged power of attorney. He did not mention the conspiracy emails or the contempt motion or the FBI referral. Either he had chosen not to address them, or more likely he did not fully understand what was in his own client's file. Garrison stood slowly. He did not button his jacket. He did not clear his throat. He walked to the center of the courtroom floor and stood there for 3 seconds in silence, letting the room settle around him the way a conductor lets an orchestra go quiet before the first note. Vernon was in the gallery. Third row, left side, a folded newspaper in his lap. He had not looked at me once. Colleen sat beside him in pearls and a navy dress, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the judge's head. They looked like guests at a funeral who were not sure whose it was. "Your Honor," Garrison said, "opposing counsel described my client as a woman who chose domesticity. Let me offer a different word. She chose sacrifice, and her family chose to exploit it." He turned to the exhibits: brokerage statements, tax filings, portfolio analytics spanning 7 years of marriage. He walked the judge through each document with the methodical patience of a man building a house brick by brick. "During her marriage, my client managed $4.2 million in family investments," Garrison said. "Without compensation, without title, without acknowledgement. She achieved a 23% annual portfolio growth rate, a figure that would earn a fund manager a corner office and a 7-figure bonus. Instead, it earned her an apron and a dinner table ambush." He paused. The courtroom was silent. "She is not a woman who chose to stop working, Your Honor. She is the unpaid CFO of this family, and the respondent's gratitude for her service was to fabricate evidence of infidelity, forge her signature on a patent document, and attempt to steal $19 million in assets that belonged to her, assets inherited from her late father. A man who spent 11 years in a laboratory developing a compound that is now saving lives." Russell Ames shifted in his chair. He flipped through his file quickly, urgently, the way a student searches for an answer during an exam he has not studied for. Grant leaned over and whispered something. Ames shook his head. Judge Harmon removed his reading glasses and looked at Garrison. "Counsel, you may call your first witness." Garrison straightened his jacket. He did not look at me. He did not look at Grant. He turned toward the gallery and said in a voice as steady as a closing door, "The plaintiff calls Dr. Felicity Underhay, forensic accountant." A woman rose from the second row of the gallery, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, carrying a leather portfolio that looked like it contained the financial biography of everyone in the room. Dr. Felicity Underhay, the forensic accountant Garrison had retained 3 months earlier to trace every dollar through the Holloway accounts. Russell Ames flipped through his file again. His face tightened. The name was not in any disclosure he had reviewed because it had been filed during his predecessor's suspension, in the gap between attorneys in the 3 weeks when Grant had no one reading his mail. Grant's composure cracked. Just a fraction. A jaw muscle. A swallow. The smallest fissure in a wall that was about to come down. Dr. Underhay's testimony took 90 minutes and dismantled Grant's financial credibility one spreadsheet at a time. By the time she stepped down, Russell Ames had objected 11 times and been overruled on 9. The judge called a 15-minute recess. When we resumed, Garrison called his second witness. Boyd looked different in a suit. Smaller somehow, like the fabric was borrowing authority his voice did not need. He took the stand with his wire-rimmed glasses and his leather portfolio, and the calm demeanor of a man who had spent his entire career letting numbers do the talking. Garrison walked him through the financial trail with the patience of a teacher, explaining arithmetic to a room that had never seen the equation before. Boyd laid it out. The payments from Holloway Commercial Realty to the shell company routed through a registered agent whose name appeared in a 15-year-old state investigation. The sole member of Coastal Bridge Partners is Darren Foyle, Boyd said. Mr. Foyle was Vernon Holloway's co-defendant in a 2009 insurance fraud case involving the Holloway Health Clinic network. The state investigated. The case was closed for insufficient evidence. But Darren Foyle never disappeared from the Holloway orbit. He simply went underground until $120,000 in fresh payments connected them again. A murmur moved through the gallery like wind through grass. Russell Ames was on his feet immediately. Objection. Relevance. The 2009 case is closed and has no bearing on this divorce proceeding. Judge Harmon looked at him over his reading glasses. The witness is establishing a documented pattern of financial relationships between the respondent's family and individuals connected to prior fraud investigations. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Stanton. You spend 7 years trusting someone, and it turns out the betrayal had a budget, a timeline, and a receipt. Every dollar Boyd traced was a decision Grant had made not in a moment of weakness, not in a fit of anger, but in a conference room with a pen and a plan and the calm certainty that I would never look. Garrison moved Boyd through the media edge payment next. Boyd confirmed what Kendall had already discovered: the fabrication fee, paid from Grant's operating account, but framed it within the larger conspiracy. The photographs were not an isolated act. They were one-line item in a multi-account, multi-year scheme that connected Grant's real estate company to Vernon's past and to a shell corporation that existed for no purpose other than to move money where it should not go. Russell Ames cross-examined Boyd for 12 minutes. He challenged the interpretation of the Coastal Bridge payments. Boyd responded with account numbers. He challenged the connection to Vernon. Boyd produced the LLC filing with Foyle's signature. He challenged the relevance of a 15-year-old case. Boyd looked at him with the serene patience of a man who had been challenged by better lawyers and said, "The money doesn't care how old the relationship is, counsel. It just follows the trail." Judge Harmon allowed himself the smallest nod. After Boyd stepped down, Garrison called Kendall Mercer to the stand. She walked to the witness chair with her laptop and a projection cable. And within 5 minutes, the courtroom screen displayed what the birthday table had displayed 18 months ago: the photographs of me with a man I had never met. But this time, the images were split. On the left, the composite. On the right, Kendall's forensic breakdown light angles marked in red pixel boundaries, highlighted in yellow. The seams where 2 different photographs had been stitched together with professional software. "The shadow angles in this hotel lobby image are physically impossible," Kendall said. Her voice was clipped clinical, the voice of a woman who had testified in federal court and did not waste words. The woman's face was composited from 3 separate stock images. The man is a commercial actor whose booking records I obtained from his agency. This was not surveillance, it was production. Garrison let the image sit on the screen for 10 seconds before he spoke. "And the cost of this production, $45,000, Kendall said. "Paid through a company called Media Edge Creative Solutions. The LLC was dissolved 6 days after the images were displayed." I gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table. The wood was smooth under my fingers. Stale coffee coated my tongue, bitter and hours old. On the screen, the fabricated version of me stood in a hotel lobby with a stranger's arm around my shoulders, and beside it, the forensic proof that every pixel of that image had been purchased and assembled like a product on a factory line. Grant was writing something on a legal pad. I could read it from 12 feet away. 2 words written in block capitals and underlined twice: "Call Dad." Garrison turned to Russell Ames. "Your witness, counsel." Ames looked at the screen. He looked at Kendall. He looked at the forensic breakdown with its red lines and yellow boundaries, and the clinical precision of a woman who had just proven, in front of a judge, that his client's most damaging piece of evidence was a $45,000 forgery. He did not stand up. "No questions, Your Honor," he said. The gallery exhaled. Someone 2 rows behind me shifted in their seat. The mint gum I had been smelling all morning drifted forward again. Colleen sat in the 3rd row with her hands folded in her lap, her face absolutely still, her eyes fixed on a point above the judge's head, as though she could will herself invisible. Garrison stood. He buttoned his jacket with the unhurried confidence of a man who had one more card to play and intended to play it perfectly. "Your Honor," he said, "the plaintiff calls one final witness today." He paused. The courtroom was silent. "Alma Prescott." Behind me, I heard my mother's chair push back from the gallery bench. The wood creaked. Her footsteps were steady on the courtroom floor, measured, deliberate. The footsteps of a woman who had been waiting 31 years for someone to ask her to speak. My mother walked past me without looking down. She placed her hand on the witness stand rail and swore the oath. And the courtroom held its breath, as though the quietest woman in the room was about to become the loudest. Alma sat straight. Her hands rested on the rail, steady, unhurried, faintly scented with the lavender hand cream she had used every morning for as long as I could remember. I could smell it from the plaintiff's table. That small detail nearly undid me. Garrison approached the stand. Mrs. Prescott, can you tell the court how you first became aware of the respondent's plan to seize your daughter's assets? Alma looked at the judge, not at Garrison. She spoke the way she shelved books precisely without hurry, every word exactly where it belonged. In January of last year, I saw my former husband Vernon Holloway at a restaurant in Savannah, Georgia, she said. He was dining with another man I did not recognize. I was 2 tables away. He did not see me. And you chose to listen? I chose to follow him, Alma said. I recognized the pattern. 31 years ago, Vernon used the same approach with me: private meetings, financial maneuvering, pressure campaigns designed to isolate and overwhelm. When I saw him at that restaurant, I knew he was doing it again, this time to my daughter. The gallery shifted. A murmur rose and settled. Russell Ames looked at his legal pad and wrote nothing. What did you hear, Mrs. Prescott? I heard my former husband say the patent must be transferred before July. Use the fake adultery evidence. She will sign while she's still in shock. Alma delivered the words without inflection. No dramatic pause. No trembling voice. She recited them the way a librarian reads a passage aloud, clearly, accurately letting the text speak for itself. The power was not in her delivery. It was in what she had carried in silence for 18 months, waiting for this room, this moment, this chair. Mrs. Prescott, Garrison said, did you make a recording of this conversation? I did. Russell Ames stood. Objection, Your Honor. Florida is a 2-party consent state. Any recording made without Mr. Holloway's knowledge is inadmissible. Garrison turned to the judge. Your Honor, the recording was made in Savannah, Georgia. Georgia is a 1-party consent state. Under federal choice of law principles, the recording is admissible in Florida proceedings when lawfully obtained in its state of origin. I have the case law here. He handed a brief to the clerk. Judge Harmon read it for 45 seconds, the longest 45 seconds of my life, then looked up. The objection is overruled. Play the recording. Garrison pressed play on the courtroom's audio system, and Vernon Holloway's voice filled the room. It was unmistakable. That low, unhurried cadence, the voice of a patriarch who had never been questioned and never expected to be. The restaurant sounds were there in the background silverware. Conversation, a server passing. Vernon spoke the way he had always spoken, as though the world existed to receive his instructions. The girl won't fight. She never has. Get the patent signed over and the land transfer done before she hires anyone smart enough to look twice. The courtroom was silent. Not courtroom quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that has texture dense heavy, the silence of a room full of people who have just heard something they cannot unhear. Grant's head dropped. Not in thought, not in strategy, in surrender. His own father's voice was doing what 18 months of evidence and testimony could not, making this undeniable. There was no composite photograph to challenge, no spreadsheet to reinterpret, no legal technicality to exploit. There was only Vernon's voice, recorded in his own words, planning the destruction of his son's marriage for profit. I pressed my nails into my palms under the table, half moons forming in the skin. I tasted salt and realized I had been biting the inside of my cheek for the last 5 minutes without knowing it. The recording played for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. When it ended, the silence returned heavier now, like a room after a detonation, when the air itself seems bruised. Garrison let it sit for 5 seconds. Then he turned to Alma. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Harmon looked at the defense table. Mr. Ames' cross-examination. Russell Ames opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No question, he said. And then Vernon stood up. He rose from the third row of the gallery with the volcanic force of a man who had spent 70 years controlling every room he entered and could not accept that this one had slipped beyond his reach. His face was crimson. His finger pointed at Alma like a weapon. "That recording is illegal," he shouted. "She had no right. She followed me. Judge Harmon's gavel came down like a gunshot. "Mr. Holloway, you will sit down, or I will have you removed from this courtroom. Order." Vernon did not sit down. The bailiffs moved toward him, two of them flanking from the aisle, their hands already reaching for his arms. The gallery erupted in whispers. Colleen sat frozen beside the empty seat her husband had just vacated, her face, the color of parchment, her hands gripping her purse like a life preserver. And then Grant stood up. Not to shout, not to object. He turned away from the plaintiff's table, away from Russell Ames, away from me. He turned toward his father, the man whose voice had just echoed through a courtroom, confessing to a conspiracy that had dismantled 2 marriages across 31 years, and said, loud enough for every person in that room to hear, "Sit down, Dad, it's over." The courtroom went still. Vernon stared at his son. The bailiffs paused. Grant's face was white, exhausted, stripped of every performance he had ever given. For the first time since I had known him, he looked like a man who had stopped pretending. The gavel came down again. Vernon sat. The bailiff stepped back. And my mother, still seated on the witness stand, folded her hands in her lap and waited the way she had waited for 31 years for someone to finally listen. The bailiffs escorted Vernon to the hallway. Judge Harmon called a 30-minute recess and the courtroom exhaled. During the break, Garrison sat beside me at the plaintiff's table reviewing his notes, and I noticed he would not meet my eyes. That was when I knew he had one more witness I had not been told about. I did not know Tamara Reyes was on our witness list, from the way Garrison avoided my gaze during those 30 minutes that had been deliberate. When the recess ended and the courtroom reconvened, Garrison stood and called her name. A woman rose from the back row of the gallery, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a gray blazer and carrying a small spiral notebook. Tamara Reyes, Grant's former secretary at Holloway Commercial Realty. She had worked for him for 3 years. She had quit 4 months before the trial, and she had come to this courtroom voluntarily. She took the stand and placed the notebook on the rail in front of her. Her hands were steady. Garrison walked her through it. The meetings she had scheduled between Grant and Vernon's intermediaries, the documents she had printed, property transfers, LLC formations, correspondence with Coastal Bridge partners, the conversations she had overheard through the thin walls of Grant's corner office. "I scheduled the meetings," Tamara said. Her voice was clear, cutting through the gallery whispers like a blade through cloth. "I printed the documents. I watched him rehearse what he'd say to his wife at the party while his girlfriend sat in the next room." Russell Ames stood. For the first time all day he attempted a genuine cross-examination. "Ms. Reyes, isn't it true that you were terminated from Holloway Commercial Realty?" "I quit," Tamara said. "And isn't this testimony motivated by personal resentment toward my client?" Tamara looked at him. Then she looked past him directly at me and said, "My mother is alive today because Mrs. Prescott's mother paid for her chemotherapy when our insurance lapsed. 4 years ago. She didn't know me. She didn't ask for anything. She just paid." The courtroom went quiet again. I turned to look at Alma in the gallery. She was sitting with her hands folded, her expression unchanged, as though paying for a stranger's cancer treatment was no more remarkable than returning a library book on time. Alma had paid for a stranger's chemotherapy and never mentioned it. Not once, not in the 18 months of late-night conversations and evidence gathering and shoebox revelations. I wondered how many other quiet rescues she had performed while I spent years resenting her silence. How many lives she had touched while I was too busy being angry about the one she left. Tamara's testimony lasted 22 minutes. She corroborated the conspiracy timeline with dates from her notebook, confirmed the Media Edge payment she had processed through the company's accounts, and described in precise detail the afternoon Grant had practiced his ambush speech in his office with I. The door closed, rehearsing the words, "Honesty is the greatest gift," while Tamara sat 12 feet away. listening through drywall. Russell Ames asked no further questions. The judge called for closing arguments. Russell Ames went first. His closing was brief 3 minutes of carefully worded generalities about marital privacy and the complexity of long-term relationships. He did not mention the fabricated photographs. He did not mention the forged signature. He did not mention the recording. He spoke like a man trying to build a house on a foundation that had already been removed. Then Garrison stood. He walked to the center of the courtroom floor. He did not carry notes. He did not consult his file. He stood in the late afternoon light that came through the high windows and spoke directly to Judge Harmon with the measured cadence of a man who had been building toward this moment for 18 months. Garrison spoke the way a surgeon closes no wasted stitch, every word pulling the wound shut with the precision of someone who knew exactly how deep it went. "This is not a divorce, Your Honor," he said. "This is a liquidation, and my client was the asset they intended to write off. She managed $4.2 million in family investments. She raised a daughter. She held that family together for 7 years. And on a summer afternoon, they carved her up at her own dinner table and handed her an envelope." He paused. The respondent fabricated evidence. He forged her signature. He violated a court order. He conspired with his father to steal $19 million in assets that belonged to her assets inherited from a man who spent his life in a laboratory trying to help people. And when she did not crumble, when she did not sign, when she fought back with the same intelligence and discipline they had exploited for 7 years, they escalated. They threatened. They forged. And they were caught. I turned my wedding ring on my finger. I had not removed it in 18 months. I did not know why. Habit, maybe. Or the last thread of a life I was still learning to release. I turned it now, unconsciously feeling the smooth metal rotate against skin that had not seen sunlight in 7 years. Judge Harmon removed his glasses. "The court will adjourn," he said. "I will render my decision at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." The gavel fell. The courtroom emptied slowly, lawyers gathering files, gallery members standing, the low murmur of a crowd dispersing after something they would talk about for weeks. Grant lingered at the defense table. Russell Ames had already left, briefcase in hand, no goodbye, the departure of a man who had taken a case for the retainer and would not be taking the next call. Grant sat alone. The courtroom was nearly empty. He looked at me across the aisle. 12 feet. The same distance as the morning. He opened his mouth to speak. I waited, but he just shook his head. He picked up his briefcase, pushed his chair back, and walked out without a word. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor, growing fainter, until the courtroom door closed behind him, and I was sitting alone at the plaintiff's table in the late afternoon dust. Hungry and exhausted and suspended in the space between everything I had fought for and everything I did not yet know. I did not sleep that night. I sat in Alma's kitchen with the lights off, watching the microwave clock count toward 9. Alma came in at 3 in the morning, poured chamomile without asking, and sat across from me in the dark. Neither of us spoke. We had said everything there was to say. What remained was waiting. At 9 the next morning, Judge Harmon entered the courtroom without looking at either table. He looked at the file, and that told me everything. A judge who is about to rule against you makes eye contact, reassurance, apology, the small human gesture of delivering bad news face to face. A judge who is about to rule in your favor looks at the paperwork. He has already decided. The decision is in the file. The rest is ceremony. He sat down. The clerk read the case number in a flat, bureaucratic voice. The courtroom was full, both tables, the gallery, the reporters from yesterday. Vernon sat in the 3rd row again, this time with a lawyer of his own beside him, a man in a dark suit I did not recognize. Colleen sat on Vernon's other side, her pearls in place, her hands folded, her face arranged into the expression of a woman attending an event she wished she had not been invited to. Grant sat at the defense table alone. Russell Ames was present, but leaning away, his chair angled toward the aisle, the posture of a man already calculating the distance to the door. Judge Harmon put on his reading glasses and began. The court finds that the respondent engaged in a deliberate, premeditated campaign of financial fraud, evidence fabrication, and asset concealment against the petitioner. The fabrication of infidelity evidence, the forgery of a power of attorney, and the violation of this court's asset freeze order constitute a pattern of conduct that this court condemns in the strongest possible terms. He turned a page. All separate property, including the Prescott farmstead in Ocala, valued at $7 million, and the pharmaceutical patent registered to the petitioner's late father, is confirmed as the sole property of the petitioner. Marital assets are divided 60-40 in the petitioner's favor. All legal fees incurred by the petitioner shall be paid by the respondent. The forgery of the power of attorney and the violation of the court's freeze order are hereby referred to criminal court for prosecution. Garrison leaned toward me. His voice was barely a whisper. Every dollar. We got every dollar. I pressed my hand flat against the plaintiff's table. The wood was smooth and cool. I had sat at this table 3 times now, and each time the surface had felt different, cold with fear, rigid with tension, and now finally still. Just wood. Just a table. Colleen left the courtroom first. She did not look at Grant. She did not look at Vernon. She walked out like a woman leaving a building that was on fire and pretending she could not smell the smoke. Vernon followed a moment later, flanked by his new lawyer, his face the color of concrete. Grant sat motionless at the defense table as the courtroom emptied around him. I looked at him. The man I had married. The man who had asked about my father's papers with rehearsed casualness, who had projected fabricated photographs on a television screen, who had sat across from me at 100 dinners with a countdown running behind his eyes. I waited to feel something: rage, grief, satisfaction, loss. Anything. I felt nothing. He was a stranger sitting in the wreckage of something he had built and then burned down himself. I did not hate him. I did not pity him. I simply did not know him anymore. Garrison touched my arm. "Time to go," he said. We walked out of the Hillsborough County Courthouse into December sunlight. The air smelled like courthouse coffee and asphalt, and beneath it the faint salt edge of Tampa Bay. I stood on the steps for a moment, letting the warmth reach my face, and breathed. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in Alma's cottage reading the news on my phone when I found the article. Bryn Holloway, 28 of Tampa, had had her pharmacy license revoked following an investigation by the Florida Board of Pharmacy. A patient had reported an adverse reaction to a misadministered treatment. The subsequent inquiry revealed that Bryn's academic credentials, the transcripts, the clinical exam scores, the diploma she had waved at the barbecue were fraudulent, falsified records submitted to the licensing board. The investigation had been referred to the state attorney's office, and Vernon and Colleen Holloway were named as persons of interest in connection with the academic falsification. How many lies does it take to build a family? The Holloways could have told you to the dollar. They had bought Bryn a career the same way they had tried to buy my land, with forgery and confidence, and the unshakable belief that no one would ever check. And now the same machinery of deception that they had aimed at me was grinding through their own foundation. I set the phone down on the kitchen table. Through the window, the cedar key waves lapped at the marina dock. The salt air drifted through the screen door. Alma was in the garden, watering her tomatoes, humming something I could not quite identify. "I didn't bring them down," I said to the empty kitchen. "They did it themselves." That evening, Garrison called. His voice had a different quality, now lighter, less guarded, the voice of a lawyer who had won his case and was calling with good news instead of strategy. "Meridian Pharma wants to meet," he said. "They're offering to license the patent directly. No intermediaries, no Vernon, no Coastal Bridge partners. They want to talk to you. Just you." I looked across the kitchen table at Alma, who had come in from the garden with dirt on her knees and a tomato in her hand. She did not need to hear the other end of the conversation. She read my face, and she was already smiling. The chamomile tea sat on the table, the same blend, the same mugs, the same wobbly table. But it tasted different tonight. It tasted like something finished. The Meridian Pharma offices in Jacksonville smelled like new carpet and ambition. I signed my father's name into a contract he never lived to see, and my hand did not shake once. The conference room was glass-walled 14th floor overlooking the St. Johns River. Dr. Graves sat across from me with two lawyers and a licensing coordinator, and Garrison sat beside me with his briefcase and his quiet confidence. The contract was thick, 46 pages, 11 signature lines. Each one a door that had been locked for 30 years finally swinging open. The terms were clean. $8.4 million upfront for the licensing rights. Royalties on future clinical applications. My father's name preserved in the patent documentation. Credited as the original inventor, his contribution acknowledged in every filing Meridian would submit to the FDA. I signed each page with a pen that felt heavier than any I had ever held, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. 11 years of my father's work in a lab the size of a garden shed. His careful handwriting on graph paper. His mechanical pencil sharpened with a pocket knife. All of it leading here, to a glass table in a building he would never have entered voluntarily. $5 million in my father's name. I allocated it before I left the building, a trust for pharmaceutical research administered through the University of Florida, funding the kind of work he had done alone and unfinanced for a decade. He had been a man who kept his notes in spiral notebooks and brewed coffee in a percolator from 1987. He would have hated this conference room. He would have loved what it meant. The remaining $3.4 million I directed into a fund supporting women who had been victims of financial coercion in divorce, women whose assets had been hidden, whose signatures had been forged, whose contributions had been erased by the people who were supposed to love them. Garrison handled the paperwork. He did not comment on the allocation. He simply filed it. As we walked out of the Meridian offices, Garrison stopped me in the hallway. "There's one more thing," he said. He pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward me. An email sent to the firm's general inbox that morning from a woman I had never met. "A stranger in Tallahassee. You showed me that fighting is possible," it read. "I don't know you, but my lawyer told me what you did and I filed my own petition this week. Thank you." I read it twice. Then I closed the phone and handed it back. Some things do not need a response. They need to be received. 2 weeks later, I sat across from Grant for the last time. Garrison's Tampa office. Mahogany desk leather chairs. The low hum of a building that conducted the business of endings with quiet professionalism. The final divorce paperwork. The last signatures. The administrative conclusion of a marriage that had ended in truth at a dinner table 18 months ago. Grant looked 5 years older. His face was thinner, his eyes hollowed. The confident angles of the man who had closed deals with a linen shirt, and a practiced smile replaced by something diminished and uncertain. His wedding ring was gone. I noticed the pale band of skin where it had been a ghost of the metal and absence that announced itself. My ring was still on. I did not know why. I had thought about removing it 100 times, and each time had stopped not out of sentiment, but out of some unfinished instinct, as though the ring was a sentence I had not yet found the period for. Grant signed his name like a man writing a eulogy, slow, deliberate, as though finishing the sentence would make the death official. He set the pen down. Garrison collected the documents. The room was quiet. Then Grant looked at me. "Do you regret those 7 years?" he asked. The question was not an attack. It was not a defense. It was the voice of a man who needed to know if the thing he had destroyed had been real, if the marriage he had dismantled for profit had ever contained something that could not be priced. I thought about it. I owed him nothing. Not an answer, not a kindness, not a single word of comfort. He had fabricated evidence of my infidelity, forged my signature, conspired with his father to steal my inheritance, and threatened me on a courthouse steps. I owed him exactly nothing, but I owed myself the truth. "No," I said. "I loved you. I only regret thinking that loving someone meant erasing myself." Grant was quiet for a long time. The traffic outside Garrison's window continued ordinary life, moving past us, indifferent to the private earthquake happening on the third floor. I didn't deserve that answer, he said. No, I said, but I deserve to give it. He extended his hand. I took it. His grip was brief, firm, final, the handshake of two people who would never touch again. Then he picked up his coat, pushed his chair back, and walked out of Garrison's office without looking back. Garrison sat across from me in the quiet that followed. You okay? He asked. Yes, I said, and I meant it. I stepped onto the sidewalk outside Garrison's office. January in Tampa, 62 degrees. Pale sun. The kind of weather that does not commit to anything. The air smelled like nothing clean and unscented, the smell of a day that had not yet decided what it wanted to be. For the first time in 19 months, nobody was waiting for me. Nobody needed me to be anywhere. No evidence to gather, no documents to photograph, no lawyers to call, no strategy to plan. The war was over. The verdict was delivered. The patent was signed. The marriage was finished. I had no idea where I was going. I started walking anyway. I walked for 20 minutes that afternoon in Tampa before I knew where I was going. Then I got in my car and drove north. The farmstead smelled like cold earth and hickory. The same smell that had filled a kitchen in Coral Gables 19 months ago. The morning I tied a designer apron and cooked for 20 people who were waiting to watch me fall. The same smoke, the same sharpness in the January air, except now it belonged to me. I drove to the Prescott farmstead at dawn. 20 acres outside Ocala, flat and quiet, bordered by live oaks that had been old when my father bought the land. The oak at the end of the driveway had dropped its leaves while I was gone, and the bare branches reached upward against the pale sky like open hands. The house was unlocked. It had been empty for 2 years, since before the barbecue, since before any of this. I pushed open the front door and stood in the hallway listening. The silence was complete. Not the heavy silence of a courtroom or the tense silence of Alma's cottage at midnight. A resting silence, the silence of a house that had been waiting. I walked through every room. The living room where my father had read the newspaper every Sunday. The bedroom where my parents had slept before Alma left. The lab out back locked, the window dusty, the workbench still visible through the glass. His mechanical pencil was probably still in there somewhere in a drawer he had organized by function and never by sentiment. The kitchen was the last room I entered. Dust on the counters, a calendar on the wall still turned to 2023. 2 years of stillness preserved in a thin gray film that covered everything like a held breath. But the bones of the room were good solid oak cabinets my father had built himself. Wide plank floors he had sanded and sealed on his knees one summer, while I handed him Rags a window that faced east because he said morning light made coffee taste better. I wiped the counter with my bare hand. The dust came away in a long gray streak, revealing the wood beneath warm golden, the color of something that had been cared for. I did not look for an apron. There was not one to find. I had left the last one folded on a chair in Coral Gables, and I had not worn one since. I made breakfast. Eggs, toast, black coffee. No garnish. No presentation. No platter arranged for 20. Just a pan, a spatula, and the particular freedom of cracking an egg into a quiet kitchen for no one but myself. If you have ever cooked a meal without an audience, not to impress, not to perform, not because someone was grading your effort, you know what that silence tastes like. It tastes like permission. The coffee was bitter and strong and exactly right. I drank it standing at the east-facing window, watching the dawn light move across 20 acres of land that bore my name. My father's land. My land. In a box of photographs I found in the hallway closet, the same closet where he had kept his boots and his rain jacket, and the flashlight he checked every Sunday, I found a note. Handwritten. His careful slanted script on a piece of lined paper torn from a spiral notebook, the edges soft from decades in a cardboard box. Daughter, this patent is yours. Don't let anyone take it away. I held it for a long time. The paper was thin and warm under my fingers. The ink faded to a pale blue, the handwriting of a man who had known what he was leaving behind and had tried, in his quiet way, to protect it. He had written this before he died, before Vernon, before Grant, before any of it. He had known. I set the note on the kitchen counter beside the coffee mug and heard tires on the gravel outside. Alma's car pulled up to the house. She got out slowly, carrying something in both hands. She walked through the front door without knocking. She had never knocked at this house. Not in 40 years, and came into the kitchen. She was carrying the rooster timer. The faded red ceramic chipped at the beak, the same timer that had sat on this counter when I was a child. The same timer she had taken with her when she left 31 years ago. The same timer that had sat on her cottage counter in Cedar Key, hiding a letter she never sent. Alma set it on the counter beside my father's note. She looked at both objects for a moment, the timer and the handwriting, and said quietly, "This belongs here. It always did." She did not explain. She did not need to. She poured herself a cup of my coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, my father's table with its familiar wobble, its scratch marks from decades of use, and we sat together in a silence that did not need to be filled. My phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen. A notification from Meridian Pharma. The subject line read, Phase 2 clinical trial positive results confirmed. My father's compound. His 11 years of work. The formula he had mapped on graph paper with a mechanical pencil. It was working. Not as a number on a contract or a line item in a courtroom exhibit. Working in the way he had always intended, in a laboratory, in a trial, in the quiet machinery of science, doing what science does when someone gives it the chance. I set the phone down. I did not open the email. There would be time for that later. There would be time for everything. I picked up my coffee. Outside, a mockingbird started up in the oak tree, the same song I had heard in parking lots, and on porches and through cottage windows for 19 months. I listened to it for a long time. There was nowhere I needed to be. I was already there. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 22 years believing that love meant shrinking. I traded a career I had built with my own hands for an apron and a kitchen that smelled like smoke before sunrise. I told myself that sacrifice was the same thing as devotion. Do not make my mistake. Do not wait until someone projects lies onto a screen in front of 20 people before you decide that your worth is not negotiable. If there is one thing I have learned from living through one of the hardest family revenge stories you will ever hear, it is this. The people who try to bury you will always underestimate what you carry in your bones. Patience is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. And the truth, no matter how long you hide it in a shoebox or behind a forged signature, will find its moment. I believe God put me through every single one of those days for a reason, not to punish me, but to prepare me. Because the woman who walked out of that courtroom was someone the woman in that kitchen could never have imagined becoming. Family revenge stories fill these channels for a reason. They remind us that loyalty without respect is just a prettier word for control. I would love to hear what you think. Did Alma surprise you? Would you have handled Grant differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. And if you want more family revenge stories told from the heart, subscribe to Family Revenge so you never miss one. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Some names, places, and details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental. The lesson is what matters, and I hope it stays with you long after you close this page.
That's the final moment for today. Thank you for time. I will see you at some game.